Go. Good morning, Professor Spooner. How are you today?
Good morning, Frank. I'm well, thank you, and I hope you are too.
I am, thank you.
Uh, um, I've been trying to keep up with my Economist, which always impresses me with the extent of its coverage, and especially with its Technology Quarterly. And what I was reading in the April Technology Quarterly this morning reminded me of several things we've talked about in the past,
Hmm.
which have to do with the acceleration of social change over the last, I forget what we usually say, probably 200 years, certainly 150.
Yeah.
It really is quite amazing how globalization and social change are related, presumably because of the continuing increase and acceleration in the increase of the number of people who come into contact with each other, and the increase, therefore, in the amount of brain power that is in operation in the world today. And most of what we have been thinking about in terms of social change has been the way we got to where we are today, starting with the Big Bang, especially after Stephen Hawking's, since we lost him and we've learned so much from his contributions.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, it really is amazing, of course, that it's just 10,000 years since we were primates like other primates, not doing anything particularly different. And now look what we're doing. And we're becoming a global species in a much more efficient way than cockroaches or other current global species and in fact, they've speciated as they've globalized, and we're remaining one single species as we globalize and work together. Anyway, what I read in the Technology Quarterly of The Economist this week is that, and by the way, it's 12 pages, and it's not the sort of thing you're going to read in 1 hour. And I certainly haven't been able to spend enough time on it to really learn everything that's in there. But what I got out of it is quite amazing. And it's the sort of thing that doesn't get into the news so much, even though really it's in the background of what we're talking about
Hmm.
all the time. And so it's not something we're not really aware of. It's just something that we don't know enough about to be as impressed with it as I think we need to be. And that is that starting back only in the 1970s or so, but at an accelerating rate since then, an increasing number of people in science, and especially in biology, have been coming together in various situations, working together on DNA and on proteins,
Okay.
and putting the two together so that we understand now how we can reprogram the DNA of species so that it's getting to the point where we're beginning to be able to control our own biological evolution, as well as the evolution of what's going on around us. Although, of course, we're nowhere near that yet, but we're becoming scientifically capable of doing it. And understanding the function of proteins as what are effectively the what should I call it? What's the best English term? I sort of motor functions in everything that life does, so that we're not only able to reprogram the genetic makeup of the different species, including our own, we're able to understand better how that genetic programming in fact operates. And so this means that, of course, we're back where we always finish up in many of these weekly sessions. Is what we need is better organization. there's already been outcry about the use of CRISPR, the technology for genetic alteration in situations which weren't first approved. It's going to require much better organization and global organization of the use of science, which is probably one of our weakest. Anything that has to do with human interaction
Right.
is something we're not very good at programming or organizing.
Well, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, I'm just you've struck a couple of chords here, dating back even to the middle or the early part of the last century, with physicists researching splitting of the atom and possibly creating a nuclear fission event, which would lead to eventually the atomic bomb. Scientists always had a capability to cross national borders and sovereign boundary lines to be able to communicate with impunity with each other, regardless of what countries they were in. And what you're discussing right now is very interesting, because one of the key requirements for the kinds of research that you're mentioning, that the economists laid out, is the need for scientists in, say, Stanford and Harvard and Germany and Russia and Japan and elsewhere to be able to coordinate and be aware of each other's efforts so they can understand and build on work being performed by others. And scientists, although the state of play is by no means satisfactory, if you have a dire disease like cancer and are trying to find out what the most current genetic therapies are, you have to look in 7 or 8 or 10 different places. But they are probably more effective than any other interest group in establishing that global cohort that jumps boundary lines and is well organized enough to be able to allow continued research based upon work being done by others in other parts of the world that you would not think that they would be aware of.
Yeah. And we are now actually getting to the point where we understand, or scientists, in some branches of science, it is understood how we might be able to reprogram, what should I say, to cure cancer, to reprogram the molecular processes which cause cancer.
But this is true. But I'm not gonna beat a dead horse here. But I just want to ask you your opinion on this. All right. It's what's striking me is the mechanism that science itself is able to use to be able to glean this information from distant parts of the scientific community worldwide, regardless of what the national situations might be, and to be able to use this. It's almost a forum on top of any other forum that exists today, organizationally speaking. Maybe it could be used as a model when we always lament the fact that organization is not keeping up fast enough with globalization. But science, in some ways, has been able to do that. This is a very fast-moving area of discovery, but these guys have figured out a way to monitor it and keep these things alive for others to work on.
Well, the problem that you are bringing up is something that's always in the front of my mind, because as an anthropologist, I'm interested in the organization of social life in all the spheres in which it's in some way productively significant. Mm-hmm. And it's amazing how little progress we've made in that, when we've made so much progress in the understanding of our understanding of the environment in which we live. And one wonders why we're so we work so well as individuals and in certain groups, but we don't seem able to bring together the numbers of people in the types of situations which are necessary to really make the most of our scientific advances. And part of it, I'm sure, has to do with population growth, because after all, this recent period of social change, accelerating social change over the last century and a half or so, has coincided with a period of the highest rate of population growth in world history.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I'm sure, got something to do with it, but also it has to do with the fact that despite the increasing capabilities resulting from digitization over the last 20 years, we still have not got used to organizing interactive processes which are not face-to-face. And we have to operate on a, we still don't manage to operate on a global scale. That's the problem.
Mm-hmm. So the scientific advancements, for example, with the proteins and being able to modify the direction of evolution, which is essentially what you're talking about, where do you see this going, or where does the economist think this is going, or is it just simply factually reported?
Well, of course, I'm an incorrigible optimist. Obviously, it could be taken over by some modern equivalent of the Nazi Party of the first half of the 20th century. However, I think that it's going to be managed in terms of global health, in particular. And I think that because of the way global health is beginning to be organized as a result of the history of medicine, there's a good chance that it will be done in very productive, functionally productive ways. But of course, there's room for all sorts of problems to arise.
Now, see, that's interesting that you mentioned that, because, for example, again, on an organizational level, the Centers for Disease Control in the United States, I'm sure interacts very, very closely with the World Health Organization, and I'm sure interacts very closely with the equivalent in Canada and France and Germany and England and Japan, et cetera, go right down the line, even China and even Russia's equivalent. I mean, those people talk to each other, and they're very well organized, and I mean, when the Ebola virus is, and I'm sure it'll happen again, we're threatening coming into the West, or the SARS epidemic coming out of Hong Kong, that mechanism mobilized very effectively. It was a very compelling example of organization on a global scale that transcended national boundaries. Did you lose my audio? Oh, okay. It's coming back. Oh, there you are. Can you hear me now?
Oh, what happened?
Yeah.
What happened?
I temporarily lost the audio. Though what I was saying,
the video as well.
Oh well, we're back now. But
okay.
But what I was saying, for example, with the Ebola and the SARS epidemic, the international CDC / World Health Organization community mobilized very effectively. That organization is in place. Perhaps it could be used as a model, as we always talk about the fact that there are no transnational models existent today to be able to meet the globalized challenges we face.
Yes. We always fall back on the framework of the United Nations.
Ineffective.
And that was a great idea to begin with, but it really hasn't achieved very much. And part of it is similar to the problem of the relationship in size between Rhode Island and California in this country,
mm-hmm.
With the 193 members in the United Nations that have very different interests, and yet all have an equal vote in the United Nations General Assembly. and because of the way the world has come to be divided up into nation states, which is essentially something that has to do with Western hegemony, and the fact that these nation states in many cases are not really working anymore, if they ever worked, it's very difficult to see how progress is going to be made in this field of global organization. And that's really what the most important and significant problem is for the remainder of this century, I think.
Mm-hmm. Does anything that you gleaned from the Economist section on technology give you any insight into future organizational improvements?
No, but it may be because of the 12 pages of The Economist takes far too long to digest. But I think that it's devoted entirely to what we're understanding scientifically in genetics and protein formation and function of proteins.
Well, go ahead.
I mean, The Economist obviously is interested in global organization, and maybe they'll do something about that later.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm going to try to find that article, because I'd be willing to bet that the recitation of discoveries included a global roll call list, if you will, of locations around the world where work is being done. So somehow, somewhere on a transnational level, the scientific community has an organization in place to monitor what's going on collectively and to make sure that all of their members have access to the same information so they can build on it.
Well, let me know. It's the April 6th issue, and let me know if you can't find it. I'll just try and find out a way to make it accessible.
I can find it.
Okay.
Well, listen, Brian, have a very happy Easter. And thank you.
That's right. We should have started off. Easter somehow doesn't seem to be what it used to be, but nevertheless, and there were no hot cross buns in Whole Foods yesterday, but still.
All right. Well, have a good weekend, and I'll talk to you next week. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.